Welcome back. This time still in the living room of my little Airbnb here. And today's Wednesday the 10th. I put that video out, and quite a few people commented and wanted to get a debrief. So I figured I'd go a little bit more in depth over the past 3 days that I've been here. Again, I started on December 8th, and today's the 10th. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday so far, full days. Um, and again, the mileage may vary on this. Don't take this as like this is how it always goes. This is just what I've been going through, and because, like I mentioned yesterday, it is an individual course. It's probably going to be different than what your experience is. I think traditionally they do classes of 5 to 6 people, and he said those dates can be a grind for those bigger classes because they've got to schedule sim time in the same day. He says it can be 10 to 12 hour days depending. But for me, we generally start about 12 o'clock, noonish, and we go to about 6:30. So we're talking about 6, 7 hours max is what we're doing. And the first 4 to 5 hours are classroom work, and then we go into the sim. And we've been flying, but they're not technically flight classes yet. There's not a lot of structure. It's more kind of getting familiarized with a lot of the systems that I don't have in the G2, or I'm sorry, in the G7, more like auto throttle, understanding the flight characteristics, shooting some approaches, all sorts of stuff like that. But they're not super structured as far as like, hey, we need to knock out this, or there's not a dedicated flight. We'll talk about that in a minute. So again, don't take this as gospel. It's not. It's certainly not. It's just my experience. So day one was Monday. Overview of the platform, high level system stuff, and then a deep dive on the fuel systems. And a lot I talked about this yesterday in yesterday's video. A lot of it was, on each component and the whys and my notes up here. And how it relates to a checklist or an emergency, and things like that. So like I'm going to show this. There's a couple little minor errors in here, so don't call me out on this, but I'll put a more detailed one on the screen. But what I mean by that is, you know, I really, really enjoy how they really drive home the correlation of a schematic like this and what each component does, how it relates to operation, and how it relates to a checklist or an emergency or something like that. Case in point, it's like, you could draw this all out and just say, oh, hey, well, here's where this lives, here's where this lives, and this is what it is. Oh, this is the fuel control valve. Okay, great. Well, what happens if, you know, in a situation like, just for specifics, if the fuel pressure sensor goes out, what happens? And how does that relate to the components in here? Well, the electronic fuel pumps goes on, and now fuel goes through the second fuel control valve. Okay, great. Well, what happens to the first one? So it's not just laying it out, it's really understanding, either even in normal situations or abnormal situations, how each of those components work. And it really makes it easy to lay those systems out. It's not just like, oh, hey, let's look at the PIM and say, this is how everything's laid out. Let's lay it out identical. You can tell, like, my notes are not exactly how the PIM has it laid out, from a diagram standpoint, but it makes sense to me, and the flow is correct, except for one little arrow in there. But you get what I'm saying. And then we did the same thing with the electrical system, understanding the why. Again, my notes that you see on the screen are not 100% accurate as far as like there's actually a front bus or a aft bus and a forward bus, but the components of how it's laid out and how each flow goes through is is all in there. And you talk about, okay, well, what happens in a Gen 2 failure? What do you lose? Well, you don't lose anything. Why? Because the flow goes to the diodes the other way. And you really learn a lot about those things in depth. I mean, we spend hours on that stuff. It's not just like draw it out once, this is what it does. You talk about all the scenarios that could happen or all the different things that happen both in emergency and normal procedures and why things do what they do. So it's really, really more in depth than I've ever gone in any kind of training, which is great. It helps actually round trip or close some gaps in my G7. And I've learned about the electrical system in there, of course. I mean, you have to when you go through different ratings and learning the plane, but this kind of helps me look at things in a little bit different light, which is really really helpful. So we spent day one, did basically the fuel system, electrical system, and then we flew the simulator. This was an FTD. It wasn't like the full motion, but it was full scale, just didn't move. Spent about an hour and a half in there shooting approaches, doing some maneuvers like steep turns, stalls. Um, Went through the avionics, but a lot of it was things that like I don't have in the G7, like auto throttles and understanding how that works. Um, and this is all G2 specific stuff that we're learning. They're not teaching anything on or the G2 plus. They're not teaching Gen 1 stuff. So it's, like when we talk about auto throttles, that wasn't in the G1 stuff. So that was kind of the first day. It was a lot, and um, went out of there. I think, well, I didn't even record anything on day one. On day two, I did, but my brain was mush the first day for sure. So day two, yesterday, um, I had to draw and explain basically the two systems that we talked about the day before, the electrical system and the fuel system, on the whiteboard or blue board in this case. And so just had to draw those out and explain it. And he was pretty adamant on me not just by memory drawing out all the components. He wanted me to draw one part of it as it flows to the next, and explain what's happening in the fuel system, not just by a memory or a picture in my mind, write it all down, be like, here's where it is. It was very process oriented. So I was able to do that by memory on both after the second day, for both the fuel system and the electrical system, because it made sense. Talking about what I was just talking about before, if you understand the why behind it, I'm a terrible rote memorization person. I can't learn that way. It doesn't make any sense to me if I don't understand why. So, he's talked about, understanding the why, but then correlating it to what's happening in the systems, either, like I said, an emergency or normal operation. Like, how do you then correlate it? That's when it really gets cemented in. So we spent some time doing that, and then we went into the power plant, the um, the Williams FJ33-5A, a medium bypass engine developing 1,846 pounds of thrust. Over 50% of that thrust is by bypass air. That's crazy. So the air that goes not through the core, but through the turbofan, the top part, the bypass, over 50% of the power. That's why it's called a medium bypass fan or medium bypass turbofan. So we took a deep dive into that. Really interesting, and it really helped me understand a lot more about a jet engine. Right? I from a high level I get it, but and like something specific like compressor stalls. Like I've heard of compressor stalls. I kind of understood, or I thought I understood. I didn't really understand what was going on. So to really understand all these things and get, I hate to keep saying it, but the why behind it really helped. He was also great about bringing parts into, I've got a little video rolling here, but bringing parts into the classroom or the little conference room that we were in to, get a hands-on and show you like the physical part when we're talking about something, like what it actually is, how it operates, when it fails, what does it do, and physically hold it really does help cement it as well. So after we did that, on day two, there was a written test, which I guess I didn't realize what was going to happen that quick, but it was a 40 question test, just like any other school, multiple choice test, that you do have to pass. And it talked about a lot of the general stuff we talked about on day one, a lot of memory items as far as the specifics, like speeds, like how, what's the crosswind limitation for landing and for starting the engine, different things like that. All the stuff on the electrical system, on the fuel system, that was all covered in the test. It was 40 questions. I think you had to get above 80%. I got a 95, and it was really because the wording on a couple. If I'm going to make excuses, but good enough to pass, and he was happy about that. So we moved on. So after that point, it was about 5 again, and we went to go fly. And this time was in the level D sim, the full motion. And it was the same kind of stuff, just familiarization with the flight controls and the systems, the autopilot, specifically, again, things that I'm not used to, because it is the same flight system, but again, like the auto throttles. And we did a lot of approaches, both fully coupled with the autopilot and hand flown. And then as I mentioned yesterday, a lot of like standardizing your approaches and those gates that you would fly through. Like, how do you set up best practices, kind of like mini airline operations almost, where you're just like you're doing everything to a standard and it's always the same. You're not going into an approach not knowing when to hit your speeds and when to have your different configurations set. It's kind of like flying through gates. It's like, okay, when I hit this, when I'm on beam, when I'm on base, when I'm the first when the glide slope is 1 dot away from centering. All these different things, you kind of have these checkpoints, and you say, you standardize it, and it makes it really, really easy, and the kind of some of that thought goes out of it, so you can be ahead of the airplane. Because the one thing they talk about, he's like, in a plane like this, if you get behind, it's not like getting behind in my 22. Like, it's going to be a problem. So you have to do everything you can to set yourself up to not be behind. So that was day 2, and then today, day 3, with some more review of the past that we did the past 2 days. Some mock oral check ride stuff, kind of going through, just cherry picking a bunch of things that we've talked about over the past 2 days, just answering questions, a lot of memory item stuff. It's the weirdest thing. It's like some of the memory items, the easiest stuff is, uh, you know, I got to spend some time tonight and tomorrow just honing in on that memory item stuff. It's just, those aren't things that I'm really good at. As far as, like, I just talked about it a little bit ago. If I don't truly understand why the rote stuff, I kind of like, I shy away from it. But I have to. There's a whole page of stuff here that you got to have this down. And by tomorrow, I mean, I've got it mostly down, but tomorrow I can't be. I'm gonna have to have all this stuff down. And then we went into the ECS system. It kind of was a little confusing to me, because for me, the only ECS stuff I have is just climate control, whereas this really talks about the pressurization, the air conditioning, and the ram air that comes in through the lower scoop. And so there's a lot. It's a system that um, I had no familiarity with, and how pressurization works, what happens in emergencies, all that kind of stuff. So we spent quite a bit of time on that, really breaking each one of those systems down. Here's my notes for that. And again, after a couple hours of doing that and understanding the whys, it's pretty easy to draw that right out and talk to it. Because the gist I'm getting is that the check ride for this type rating is really going to be heavy on the systems. You have to have a good understanding of all the systems in here, how they work, the components. You don't have to rebuild a jet engine, but you have to really understand about, the N2 section, N1 section, how it works, all that kind of stuff. Like, you gotta know it. And once you break it down and you know the why of each one of those, it's pretty easy. I feel like I said that a billion times, the why, the why, the why. But it is really true. Let's see in my notes here. So today we did that. We again went from 12 to 5 today on that stuff. And then we flew for another, call it an hour and a half in the full motion sim again. And we shot some approaches. and started doing some emergency stuff. We did an engine fire with a full caps pull, which is wild because the sim's moving. I got a little behind the plane during that, but it all worked out. Um, and I would say the takeaway from today on that stuff is you have more time than you think, or that you anticipate. You think like, okay, when you have an engine fire, you kind of like you're amped up and you're trying to rush through things. And if you are really good on the memory items, which there's not that many for that, and if you have like a secondary flow, because there's some best practices that you can do, specifically like in an engine fire. Um, you can, for example, like within 7 seconds, you can have the fire extinguished. You can have the autopilot set up for you on best glide, turning towards the nearest airport in about, like I said, about 7 seconds. And if you're up at, you know, 10, we did this and we were at 12,000 feet, like you've got a lot of time to start either getting above an airport, or finding a place to land if the weather was good. You've got some options. So a lot of that is really just taking a moment, having a great understanding of your systems to know how to use it to your advantage in a heightened state. Tomorrow, more review, and then flight planning prep as we're kind of wrapping up ground school. I start my flight training days technically on Friday. So Friday, Saturday. What's what we're kind of planning on now is Friday, Saturday, Sunday are going to be flight days. They are. He explained it as like 2.5 hours, a break, and then another 2.5 hours. And the flights are very structured. Like we looked at, he printed off all the different flights we're going to be doing. They're full flights. They're like, hey, you're going to go from Phoenix to Las Vegas, and here's your route, and you're going to fly the whole flight. And I think that the check ride is like that too. There's a specific flight that we're going to fly. It's not like you just get up and start doing things. You part of it is planning and flying a flight. So the next starting Friday, those are going to be the flight days. So tomorrow's going to be some more recap. Another, he wants to make sure that I'm good on, again, all my memory items, and that I can explain all the systems we talked about today, the ECS, and just do a big, huge recap of everything. There's some other stuff we need to talk about. I know he kind of previewed the next lesson. I think it's lesson 5 out of the out of the curriculum. It's some ungodly amount of like slides. It's like 2,000 slides or 1,500 slides or something. It's a lot of material, and we have been just ripping, just going through it. But it's all making sense, and we're not skipping anything. That's for sure. Um, but it's like drinking from a fire hose. So I think if it's something that's on your radar, you're going to be doing. If you're in a full classroom setting, I would be prepared for a little bit longer days, and maybe a little bit longer days as far as hours, and then days in total. My check ride's scheduled for Tuesday, so I got here Monday, and then I'm doing the check ride on Tuesday, and that's, I think in a typical class they take weekend breaks, but we're going right through. So for me, it would be a full, and I think we're planning on taking Monday off. So I think if we fly Friday, Saturday, Sunday, full flight days, and if he feels great about everything, and I do too, I think we're gonna just kind of do a mini review on Monday, decompress day, just kind of chill out, and then do my check ride on Tuesday. At least that's the plan for now, but it could change. So that's it. That was just a lot of rambling for the last 20 minutes, but I thought there was enough of you that wanted to kind of get the debrief. So hopefully that gives you a good indication of what I've been up to. Will do the same. Um, I'll probably do the same thing on Sunday. I'll do another 3-day recap and talk about the flights and stuff like that. But it's super cool. The level D sims are crazy. They're so fun. Um, and the plane is really fun to fly. I can't wait to fly it for real. It'll be a lot of fun. I'll be curious to see how close or not close the sim replicates everything, but I have a feeling it's pretty close. The one thing I will say is I'm pretty surprised at, they talk about, because the engine's in the top and the back, when you apply a lot of thrust, it wants to push you down. If you think about the engine on the back is up here and that thrust coming in, it's kind of at an angle. As soon as you apply full power, you have to be ready on that stick because it wants to push you forward, which is kind of very different than like a piston. When you pull full power, it wants to fly away. This wants to kind of come down, and it's pretty apparent in there. That's the stick can get heavy sometimes, and you just got to be ready on that trim. But yeah, other than that, it's about 9:30. I'm gonna crash out. All right, thanks for watching.